Hey everyone, this is the Where Data Meets Business podcast, in which we discuss how data driven approaches can help you achieve business outcomes bigger, better, faster. I'm Sonia Ketkar, former academic and researcher, current consultant, data enthusiast, and forever New Yorker. Our topic today is using customer data to drive product vision. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder to subscribe to this channel and to our newsletter, databusiness.substack.com, to never miss an update. My guest today is Amira Youssef. Amira is a product executive and public speaker with over 20 years of global experience specializing in AI, cloud technology, and digital transformation. Currently a chief product officer at a legal tech AI SaaS startup, she's driving the development of a platform that creates a seamless marketplace to connect clients with attorneys. Previously, at Microsoft, Amira led the growth of Azure Edge AI, creating a new product category and driving adoption across Fortune 500 companies through strategic partnerships with NVIDIA and Intel. She has mentored over 50 future leaders through Women in Product and regularly delivers keynotes on AI, leadership, and career development. Amira, thank you for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia, for having me, and I'm excited for our conversation. Such an important topic.
I agree. I'm excited too. As I mentioned in your intro, you are currently Chief Product Officer at a legal tech startup. But how did you get here? What has been your career path?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me, and it's related a little bit to our topic. So, actually, my career started in customer insights. 20 years ago, this is where my journey started. My first client was Vodafone. I started in the mobile business and I was in customer insights. So, the topic is very passionate for me. When I look at my career, for me, I didn't only navigate functions or technologies, but also continents. I moved from Egypt to London to Seattle and now New York. And from a function perspective, I started, as I said, from customer insights. I moved to product marketing and then product management. And when I look at my career, I spent 20 years in big tech. And I worked in various companies, in Nokia in the good days and the bad days, BlackBerry, BBC. I spent 8 years in Microsoft. And I kind of had a moment of transition as like, you're next. And I really wanted to flex this muscle in terms of entering into the startup world. And for me, it's not just about the startups, it's building that entrepreneurial muscle, like bringing all these experiences together in terms of how do you make a business and build a business from the ground up. That was my motivation for that transition. And it's been an exciting journey to build and strengthen that muscle.
I'm sure. I find it really interesting that you have worked in so many different geographical markets and also different functional areas that you mentioned. What have been sort of some of the similarities, if you will, and differences at a very high level, your experience?
Yeah, I would say from a function perspective, I'm a very strong believer that my customer obsession from the early days that made me a very good product executive because that's at the core. When I think about anything I'm trying to build, I really think of the customer first. I do not think of technology first. That was the common grounds across. So I'm the annoying product person, like, what did the customer say? Where's the customer data? That is one of my strongest sense is that think really about what is the customer, what are the problems we're trying to solve for them at the core of things. So that's first. From a geography perspective, I think it's a bit different in terms of how do you influence. Like in the Middle East, it's very relationship based, even like based on knowing your family and getting that kind of warm introduction first. In the UK, for example, it was very different, is that you build the relationships after work on these social happy hours, is that this is where the bonding happens at work. I think in the US, it's more transactional. I would say building relationships is like, what is the commonality that we can work together and make it a win-win in partnership. So it's all about, in my opinion, the common across is it's all about building relationships, but the execution and the finer tune of steps is very different. And how do you make that happen into reality?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I am a part of now two cultures, one that I grew up in and one that I, live and work in. So they're both very different from each other. One is certainly fits some of the categories that you talked about, and the other one, of course, in the US, as you mentioned. I agree with that. So talking about your passion for customers and your customer needs, and as you worked in your different roles, and the theme of this episode, using customer data to drive product vision, maybe we can split that up into two and just take a look at the output or the outcome piece here, which is product vision. In your experience, how would you describe product vision?
For me, like product vision at the core of it, if I think about it, articulating very well what is the problem we're trying to solve, because that is the starting point. Like if you have that conviction is that this is the problem I'm trying to solve, the product vision then becomes very natural because it's like, okay, how are we going to bring to life or solve the solution? And then work back is eventually post product vision into the details and the stories and the Jira ticket and the implementation, etc. But I would say for me, the core part is really articulating that problem that you're trying to solve, because there's lots of ideas and ideas fail because we were not grounded. There's many ways to solve this problem. And this is where maybe in the time of the execution, you can flex and try different techniques. But I think if you're not grounded, this is where problems fail. It's that you misunderstood the motivation, the behind the idea. So the product vision is articulation of this problem. And partially is how we're going to solve it. But again, I think this is where like the strategy flexes in terms of the product vision. As we tried this, it didn't work, we can try this, but it has to always be grounded in that customer problem we're trying to solve.
So then going to that first part of it, which is customer data, what kind of data do you need to use in order to come up with that product vision?
Yeah, so I'm a fan of like triangulating data, like really taking a 360-degree approach from looking at multiple lenses. For example, like having customer interaction constantly, like more in one-to-ones, whether customer meetings or customer research or usability testing. So really having that first-hand customer experience is very important. The second part is leveraging any touch point in our products, looking into the customer support issues, if they're leaving comments on reviews or your website, digging into these, because this is another bucket of information that you can learn about your customer. The third is looking at this behavioral data. So how much are they really engaging with your product, from usage, churn, adoption, you name it, leveraging everything you have in terms of behavioral data. And the fourth pillar is looking at a competitive landscape. So how are we doing against the competition? How are they viewing the competition? What are the market dynamics? Because sometimes it's outside your control that you need to learn in terms of the landscape. So these are the four pillars that I often look at.
In the first pillar you talked about, I think, was about one-on-one, interviews or just surveys or some kind of data collection from customers in a very primary way, right? So how do you identify what the signals are in that in that customer data? Do you have any best practices, or how do you define what you're looking for, and how do you measure that?
I like to always ground things in objectives. There's data and there's noise, but you have to have a goal, like, for example, customer data from support or like online reviews. You'd use sentiment analysis to understand this. But I think if you're going into a customer meeting or, things that I think about is how are the customers enjoying your product? What is their current experiences? Obviously probe into any pain points that they're experiencing, but also leveraging in the future. There's the now and the then, and how do you think about, well, what's next? Maybe we're not thinking of other problems that we're not solving. What is really emerging underneath of these conversation is the unmet needs. So I really like to, particularly the one-to-ones, is leverage those conversations because they're more strategic in nature. Like you have valuable time, so you always have to think how do you evolve your product to kind of fulfill the customer need. So I like to go into those conversations with a particular goal because then you can also drive the conversation. It's not just a meet and greet, it's more, hey, what's the health of the customer and where can I go next?
I guess that makes it a very efficient conversation too, because you have guardrails about the topics that you're going to discuss.
Yes.
And I like what you said about thinking about the future as well, because, sometimes we get so narrowly focused on the current, which of course is important, but also thinking about the future while you're building that vision or product out is also important. Another pillar that you talked about was the behavioral usage metrics.
Mhm.
Have you, of course, depending on the platform, the metrics are going to vary in terms of importance, but are there specific metrics or indicators in your experience that have been very valuable in giving you more information?
I think, I mean, as you said, like in behavioral data, there's so much, like you can swim in the data. But one signal that I really like, this is the biggest one, is usage. How often are your customers using your products? They can tell you they're satisfied, etc. But if they're not engaged in the product, that's the first signal, as in, okay, there's a problem, and keeping an eye on the churn because churn is a laggard metric, in my opinion, looking at your current usage and really understanding how are they using your product today, because that will tell you, and this is where I would say the triangulation of the data becomes very interesting because you had your customer interviews, you heard some certain pain points, you're looking at the usage, so you're trying to build that narrative. Why is this happening? Is it more of an execution? We're not doing it in an intuitive way. Oh, hey, we missed the mark. That's not what the customer is requiring altogether.
Got it. Connecting those two pieces together now, the product vision with all the data that you just talked about, how do you connect the two? How are you then using this data from the customer to drive product vision, which we just talked about?
Yeah, so taking the goal, because we have to ground everything in goals. Otherwise, you're, like navigating the ocean from this perspective. Just to give you an example, when we're building an MVP for one of the startups I've joined, we're looking for the basics, like is the core of the problem, what are the basic problems we're solving, and like thinking through this end-to-end flow from developing these experiences. How do you scale, for example, how do you make a lawyer's experience from a digital transformation easier? So we're looking for what are the key pain points to make that end-to-end. So I think there is a difference between if you're building a new product, so 0 to 1, versus an established product is like, okay, are we trying to make V2 more efficient, more user friendly? What is that next chapter? So I think using the data and the product vision, but you have to have also a high level goal is where do you want to take your product next in order to leverage that data in a more useful manner to develop that product vision.
Digging a little bit deeper into the new product versus existing product piece
Yeah.
of it, with established companies, they probably have existing products, and you have experience there as well. I know
Yeah.
established companies launch new products as well, but we kind of associate that a lot with the startup world. What are some of the differences that you've seen in how data is utilized in both those approaches or
Yeah.
types of products?
Yeah. I think in the startup world, like it's more organic in the sense it's not very orchestrated. We're following the same steps, but less of use of frameworks, or it's more real time, like building like the V1 from an MVP perspective. You have to be very agile. So you're in and out is like, okay, let's pivot here. So I would say the difference is more real time because that's how the development process is happening. I think in larger organizations, for example, as in Microsoft, customer feedback is always there, but I think where it's more active. It's tied into when you're doing semester planning. So that was particularly for Microsoft Azure. It was every 6 months. So that was the key signal, as in, okay, you're collecting that information, you're mining the data, building up to like, okay, pre-semester planning to influence stakeholders, to build up the roadmaps, and kind of you have to build your dependencies. It's a very large scale. So it's more orchestration. So the data is there. You actually have like big teams to help you with that. But you have to really understand the rhythm of the business so you can influence at the right moments. You have to get the approvers from the CVP, etc. There's semester planning day and sign off and to allocate all these resources. So I think the main difference is one is more structured in the process versus another one is much more agile, because we're a smaller team, we're 10 people, so you can flex very quickly as, okay, let's shift the resources. It doesn't need that whole process in a very longer period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that, because another podcast guest whom I spoke with, previously, he pretty much said something very similar, which is in the big tech or larger companies, you almost see like a slower decision-making process because of all the different components that you talked about. So it's really interesting to see the same theme being repeated. You've worked on so many different products, of course, during your career. Do you have any particular one that you're most proud of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the, it's not per se a product, but one of my roles at Microsoft was turning around the voice of the customer program for Azure. So if you would think about the product, it was Azure. This was really a proud moment for me for multiple perspectives. I joined the team, and this was really a failing program. It was not doing very well. All stakeholders had issues with the voice of the customer program for many rightly so reasons when I got to know them. And they were also cynical because a few people tried to turn around the program and were unable to. And this was the challenge. And I would say in 3 years, I turned around the program. And until this day, it's a key foundation pillar in Microsoft Azure, how they do semester planning. So it's a proud moment because it's still a key pillar, but also lasted beyond my years from establishing and turning around. How I turned around in terms of a product listening to the feedback. So again, it's ironic because you have the two sides, the voice of the customer program, but also I started by listening to the stakeholders internally. What were the issues? Why were people very cynical against the program? So that was my foundation, is listening to the customers and using metrics like how satisfied they were with the program to make further adjustments. But the whole idea of the program where it was turned around for me is, again, going back to where I started, is that triangulation. Because they were looking at one data point thinking they will solve their holy grail, which is, no, that's not possible. Historically a quant survey that compared internal data of Microsoft users Azure to competition, which is not even apples to apples. So kind of fundamentally, ABC is like incorrect and is just using survey data. And this is where kind of I started like, introducing different lenses, how we need different data to answer different questions. So I introduced the one-to-one customer interviews, like kind of in a formal process. It's like, how do you be specific? It's not just a general conversation, having a goal. We're looking for new innovation. We have to be specific when we're to get the information, as in the whys and where to go next. So that was one of the things of the interviews. The second thing was triangulating the internal like customer data, the behavior with internal surveys for the customer, so you can marry that behavioral. So they said this, but they did that, and really understanding that dynamics from behavioral. And then we had actually blinded competitor interviews with blinded Microsoft. So then we can really benchmark ourselves against how are we doing against AWS and GCP in terms of the different touch points. So these were the three components. And on top of that, we built that framework that really making us understand the data in the sense of, okay, we have to kind of measure ourselves in terms of the foundations, in terms of the innovation, and then the final pillar, which in my opinion, that was one of the blind spots of the team, was the customer experience. Azure is a very complex product. It's the whole cloud. So you have 20 categories, and within each category you've got different products, and that was the part where we weren't looking. For example, our documentation is out of date and customers are confused. That's why they're opening a lot of tickets, because the documentation is not up to date and they can't use our products for that reason. The portal, for example, was really not usable, and it was actually working against basic UX principles in terms of interaction. So these were kind of blind spots. Oh my God, like we can fix this. And the team was historically really focused just on features and feeds versus how does this product work from an end to end. So that was for me the power of also bringing all these teams together. Do not think of your product in isolation.
I love that story. It sounds like, the blind spots were really important, or rather uncovering those blind spots was really important in moving this forward. One of the other things that keeps coming up is the people factor. Yes, you can gather all this customer data, you can draw insights from it, but then how do you kind of bring other people on board who are also stakeholders but not customers within the organization? How do you convince them of that customer data, the insights from that being valuable to drive the product forward?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Part of it was I had to give people, this internal stakeholders, confidence in the program. So when I revamped the program, I really put a lot of energy actually spending time with the stakeholders. I updated them. This is the changes we're making. I'm building this program with you, for you. So that was a clear message that, I informed everybody, I made them owners. So for example, when we're developing the questions or like the surveys or the interviews, I would invite them to the table. So I made it very transparent that they're part of the process. I'm not just doing this in isolation. And I think this is where a lot of people in data kind of miss that point. Hey, your stakeholders have the knowledge of the product and they are living in this particular feature, or so build with them these programs, involve them in the process, ask them to participate in the interviews. And the other part that I also part of the program revamp is we created all the assets in terms of like dashboards and reports online. So it was helped like self-service. So it's very transparent. These are the questions. This is the process. You can mine data however you want. So empowering the team. And then the final part is I worked with our CVP and really started developing, I think that was maybe year 2 in the program, OKRs across Azure. And one of the OKRs was customers love Azure. And I was the owner of that metric. And everybody had to kind of participate for that OKR. So that encouraged people to participate in terms of leveraging the data to drive that metric. And we increased that by 25% in year 3. I would say the key tip for other folks is like engage your internal stakeholders ongoing. If they're part of the journey, they're going to come on board. But if you kind of do it in isolation and expect them to accept the data at the end, that is a very hard sell, because everybody has opinions. Like, well, tell me how you collected the data. What are the questions? Well, I could have written the question differently. By participating, everybody's aware and expecting I'm going to get results. And we have a discussion. And part of it, when we were also sharing the results, there was also workshops. It's not just reporting. It's how does that mean? What does it implement? How it implements affects our roadmap. Where are the investments? How you mine the data, collect the data. The way you share it out in the organization is equally important to make it successful, because actually some people are not comfortable using data. And I think that was prior my days, that was where people were stuck. It was just reporting data. Sure, data's everywhere. What you make out of that data, and some people need more help in like, what does that really mean to me and how can I use it?
This is a question I feel like I have to ask. How do you think AI is going to change, all of this? How we use data, how we draft product vision? And I know you're working for an AI-based startup right now. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm fascinated with the power of AI. I think it's going to change fundamentally the way we work. If I would kind of reflect, one of the biggest kind of feedback I always got is we want it faster. And it takes time. If you are collecting this data, mining this data, you want to be very detailed. It does take time, unless you put like more human resources, which we did, but still, it takes time. So I think AI kind of has the power that it will take some of the fundamentals away. I would be have been able to spend more time on those workshops and explaining the why, which kind of I would say was always towards the end with limited time and resources. Even if it's V1 and you need to check, for example, you've got some behavioral data and you're asking it, tell me what this means. It will give you at least first draft. You can start, you can rethink, you can fine tune. So I think in product management people or data people, you just have to be more mindful while you're taking this data, critique it, think about it. Just don't take it for granted, but it will give you an edge up for V1 and get you started because I think right now AI does do it faster. I think this was many years ago. I attended a conference in Qualtrics. I do not recall the speaker, but he was really anti-AI. He went on a rant for 30 minutes about it was like a customer insights conference, and the following speaker just he made a joke. Clearly, he never did data analysis by himself, and he does not know how tedious it is sometimes and takes a long time, which is true. So I think it will free us to do more in the value add work, which sometimes we don't have enough time to do because there's so much to make through the steps from step A to step B.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even something simple like making slides, slide deck takes so long if you're doing it manually. So it would be
Yes.
great to have help for some of those tasks that help you move faster, as you said, towards more value adding activities. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about women in product, which you've been very active with. What is it and how can people get involved with it?
Yeah. So Women in Product is an organization. Anyone can join it. It's for free. You can participate in the conferences. They do regular talks. There's local chapters. There's lots of ways of opportunity for you to join. When I joined more actively in Women in Product, I came a point in my life as I really wanted to give back to the community. I was given the gift of time, even though working in the startup, I did have some free time and I really wanted to see how can I get involved to mentor other women. And Women in Product had this program as Building Career Clarity, which they run it twice a year. And I put my hand up. I said, I would love to volunteer in this program as a mentor and mentor other women. It's been fantastic participating, developing the content, and working with amazing women and to build their career clarity. And there's a program right now running that's very exciting and rewarding. It was one of my objectives for a few years, but it never made the list. But for the last 2 years, I've been participating and it's been awesome.
And for everyone listening, I'll include links to Women in Product as well in the show notes for this episode. Talking about making it to lists and finding time for things, how do you integrate work and life? I'm sure it's not easy.
Yeah, I always think about this as life in chapters. I've been in the US for the past 10 years, and I would say my Microsoft years, the 8 I was with them, was very heads down on working. So definitely it was work up, life wasn't so much. And the transition was my mom got diagnosed with dementia and I had to take a sabbatical. As much as I'm very, I would say, career oriented, goal oriented, but that was a moment where I would say I really thought hard as my mom comes first. She was always there for me when I needed her across my career. And that was a moment I'm going to take a career break. I'm going to support my mom. She lives in Egypt and I really wanted to take care of her and give back. There's many different ways that you can build success. there is life stages and life moments. So 2 years ago, the world has changed with my mom diagnosed with dementia. I transitioned into startups. And I designed with the startups, I was very clear. I'm very keen on the 4-day work week. I did negotiate that I wanted to work 4 days. I didn't mind longer hours during this 4 days work week, but Friday is my me time day where I do projects that I'm interested in, coach women, do public speaking. So I made a conscious decision, but it was, I would say, the point in time where I was at my career. I had the experience. I was able to say, this is what I want, and I'm going to design my life with that flexibility to get it.
Yeah, I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people because we all have to balance or integrate work life, and sometimes life throws curveballs at us, and we just have to figure out a way to adapt to those.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Amira, this was such a great discussion. I learned so much, and I'm sure that our listeners will as well. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. I enjoyed our conversation and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. For folks listening, to stay connected with us, please share and subscribe. And you can also sign up to our newsletter, databusiness.substack.com. See you next time.